Today, we are diving into an incredible story. It's about what happens when Nobel Prize-winning science slams right into 2,600-year-old wisdom. And we're going to see if, together, they can finally help us crack one of humanity's oldest puzzles. Can we actually, really, slow down the aging process? But let's start with a question for you right now. What if every single thought you have, every little wave of stress or moment of peace, is acting like a tiny sculptor, constantly rebuilding your body molecule by molecule? You know that feeling, right? That little sand timer inside all of us, just ticking away. And for centuries, humanity has been obsessed with stopping it. I mean, you had the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, who sent entire fleets out to sea, desperate to find an elixir of life. He looked for the answer everywhere, except, well, inside himself. But what if that whole external search was a wild goose chase from the very beginning? What if the real secret to a longer, healthier life has been hiding in plain sight this whole time? A place so obvious we've just completely overlooked it. What if it's right at the tips of your own shoelaces? Okay, so let's get into it. To really understand that whole shoelace clue, we've got to go deep. I mean, way deep inside our own cells to look at the biological clock itself. So this whole thing kicks off back in the 1970s. Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn gets fascinated by this weird, basically immortal little organism she found in pond scum. And that spark of curiosity leads to this massive discovery in 1984 and eventually a Nobel Prize for figuring out the exact mechanism of how our biological clocks tick. And here it is, the big reveal. The secret is something called telomeres. And yep, they're basically the little plastic tips on your shoelaces. They cap the ends of our chromosomes, and their whole job, their incredibly important job, is to stop our DNA from fraying and falling apart. So here's how aging actually works on a cellular level. Every time one of your cells divides to, heal a cut or just keep you running, those little protective caps, the telomeres, get a tiny bit shorter. Snip! And they keep getting shorter and shorter until eventually they're so worn down the cell just can't divide safely anymore. It becomes an old, retired cell that starts sending out these inflammatory signals. And that, in a nutshell, is the aging process. So, here's the million-dollar question, right? If the length of our telomeres decides how fast we age, then what decides the length of our telomeres? The answer is, honestly, it's a bit of a shocker. Just look at that number, 17 years. In a really important study, scientists looked at mothers who were caregivers for chronically ill children, so under immense, long-term stress. They found that their telomeres had shortened so much that biologically they were 9 to 17 years older than their actual age. And that reveals the true villain in this story, chronic stress. Its weapon of choice, a hormone called cortisol. You can think of cortisol as being like an acid at the molecular level. It literally eats away at your telomeres. And as a double whammy, it blocks the very enzyme that's supposed to repair them. And this is where things get really profound. Because this cutting-edge scientific discovery is an absolutely stunning confirmation of ancient wisdom. 2,600 years ago, the Buddha taught that the mind is the master and the body is its servant. And now modern science is showing us the literal biological blueprint of how that works, right down to our DNA. So this raises a pretty powerful question, doesn't it? If our minds can speed up aging, can they also slow it down? Well, it turns out the answer is a big yes. Let's look at two ancient, let's call them biotechnologies, that were designed to do exactly that. The first one is a concept called Sila. Now, traditionally, that translates to virtue or morality. But for what we're talking about today, let's look at it in a purely practical, scientific way, as a type of biological armor. And check out how this armor works. It's a chain reaction. When you practice basic ethics, not harming people, not lying, not stealing, your brain's threat detector, the amygdala, just calms down. You feel safe. When you feel safe, your body stops pumping out the stress hormone cortisol. And when cortisol levels drop, the repair enzyme telomerase is suddenly free to get to work and actually rebuild your telomeres. So living an ethical life isn't just some nice idea, it's a direct biological strategy for better health. Okay, so if Sila is our shield, our protection, what about a repair tool? What can we do to actively rebuild the damage that stress has already caused? And that brings us to our second piece of ancient tech, samadhi. Now that word points to a state of really deep, focused meditation. But again, Let's reframe it. Forget anything esoteric. Think of this as the ultimate biological repair tool. And the scientific data on this is just wow. A study called the Shambhala Project found that after just a 3-month intensive meditation retreat, people had, on average, a 30% increase in their telomere repairing enzyme. 30%? That is like finding a biological fountain of youth, and the key to turn it on is simply training your own mind. And this isn't just some vague feeling of being more relaxed. These are real, physical, measurable changes to your brain. Research out of Harvard shows that meditation literally reshapes it. Your amygdala, the fear and stress center, actually gets smaller. At the same time, your hippocampus, which is key for learning and memory, gets thicker. You are physically building a less stressed, more resilient brain. Okay, so let's take this idea and run with it. If just a few months of practice can do that, what's the absolute peak? What's the limit of human potential if someone truly completely masters these inner technologies? Well, consider the historical account of a monk named Fra Bakulathera. The story goes that he lived to be 160 years old, which is pretty incredible. But that's not even the most astonishing part. In all that time, he reportedly never had a single sick day. Not one. Now, the point here isn't about some supernatural miracle. It's framed as the natural result of someone gaining complete and total mastery over their own internal state. By perfectly applying these principles of Sila and Samadhi, he kept his body in such a state of perfect balance that its own repair systems just worked at peak efficiency for his entire life. And so, that brings this whole conversation right back to you. The science and the ancient wisdom both seem to be pointing to the same thing. A longer, healthier life isn't some mythical elixir you have to go find. It's something you can actually cultivate from within. The path is there. But that leaves us with one last, really important question. If you could have that extra time, that extra health, what would you live for?